The hangar at San Diego Executive Airport hummed with the low, constant rhythm of early morning operations, fuel carts whining, toolboxes clanking, distant engines coughing awake. Sunlight filtered through the high steel windows in long, pale streaks, catching dust in the air like suspended sparks. Captain Rachel Monroe stood perfectly still at the edge of it all. Her uniform was immaculate, navy jacket pressed sharp, silver wings pinned precisely above her heart. She had arrived 40 minutes early, as always. For Rachel, aviation wasn't just a career, it was control. Order. A world where checklists mattered and emotions stayed locked behind procedure. She rested her flight bag at her feet as the dispatcher slid the flight manifest across the counter. Charter 712, San Diego to Denver, 2 pilots, your pick. Rachel scanned the page quickly. Aircraft type, tail number, fuel load. Then her eyes stopped. First Officer Daniel Carter. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The dispatcher didn't notice at first. Smooth route today, light headwinds, you should be cruising by. I won't fly with him. The words dropped into the room like a snapped cable. The dispatcher blinked. I'm sorry, Captain. Rachel looked up now, eyes cold, voice calm but firm. Reassign the co-pilot. A pause, a glance back at the computer. Captain Monroe, that's not. Daniel Carter is not flying with me. Across the hangar floor, just beyond the glass doors, a man stood near the aircraft. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair threaded with early gray. He held a coffee in one hand, flight bag in the other, posture relaxed, but his eyes were alert, focused. Daniel Carter. Rachel had read his file months ago. Former corporate aviation, excellent hours, clean record, then the gap. 2 years. She knew what that gap meant. Kids, custody schedules, sick days, emergencies that didn't respect flight plans. She'd seen it before, pilots distracted by lives they couldn't leave behind. And Rachel Monroe didn't gamble with the sky. I don't fly with pilots who bring their personal lives into the cockpit, she said evenly. The dispatcher swallowed. Captain, he's already assigned. Then unassign him. The tension crept outward, spreading through the hangar. A mechanic slowed his walk. A junior pilot looked up from his phone. Outside, Daniel noticed the shift. He didn't strain to listen, didn't step closer. He already knew. He'd heard it before, different words, same meaning. He took a slow breath. Inside, the dispatcher lowered his voice. Captain, Mr. Carter was specifically requested for this flight. That made Rachel pause. By who? Before the dispatcher could answer, the glass door slid open. Daniel stepped inside. Up close, Rachel noticed details she hadn't from a distance. The lines around his eyes, the worn leather of his jacket, the quiet confidence in the way he moved, unhurried but deliberate. Captain Monroe, he said politely, morning. She met his gaze without warmth. This flight isn't going to work. I figured, he replied calmly. The dispatcher looked between them, visibly uncomfortable. I'll give you a moment. He retreated. Silence settled in, thick and awkward. Rachel crossed her arms. I don't fly with pilots whose attention is divided. Daniel nodded once. You mean because I'm a single father? Her eyes flickered, but she didn't deny it. Yes, she said. Because when things go wrong at 37,000 feet, I need to know my co-pilot is fully present. Daniel didn't bristle, didn't argue. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small, almost tired smile. That's fair. That response threw her off. I won't hold it against you, he continued. I'll let operations know you want someone else. He turned away before she could respond. Rachel watched him walk past her, toward the hangar doors. Toward the aircraft. Something about that bothered her. She followed him outside, heels clicking sharply on the concrete. The jet sat gleaming in the sun, a sleek mid-sized charter aircraft, white fuselage striped in Horizon Charter blue. Rachel had flown this tail number twice before. It felt familiar, safe. Daniel walked slowly around it, not boarding. He stopped beneath the nose, set his coffee down, and reached out, resting his palm against the aircraft's skin. Not casually, reverently. Rachel frowned. "What do you think you're doing?" He glanced back at her, checking on her. "Step away from the plane," she snapped. "You don't touch an aircraft you're not flying." Daniel straightened, but he didn't move away. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Rachel tensed. He pulled out a slim black folder. "I think we should clear something up first," he said quietly. He opened it and held it out. "Before you refuse the flight." Rachel hesitated, then took the folder. Inside were documents, registration numbers, maintenance logs, insurance certificates. Her eyes scanned quickly, then stopped. Her breath caught. At the bottom of the page, under registered owner, was a name. Daniel Carter. Her fingers tightened around the folder. "That's not possible," she said. Daniel met her gaze evenly. "It is." The hangar behind them seemed to go silent again. Even the engines felt distant now. "You own this aircraft?" she asked, voice low. "Yes," he said simply, "I do." Rachel felt heat rush to her face. Shock, embarrassment, something dangerously close to panic. "This is a Horizon Charter jet," she said. "They manage it," Daniel replied. "Operate it, crew it." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "But it's mine." Rachel stared at him, mind racing. She had just refused to fly with the owner of the plane on the tarmac, in front of half the staff. Inside the hangar, the dispatcher had stopped pretending not to watch. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Still don't want to fly with me, Captain." Rachel swallowed. She had never felt so exposed, so wrong. She forced herself to straighten, mask snapping back into place. "Let's just get airborne," she said stiffly. Daniel studied her for a long second, then nodded. "After you." As Rachel climbed the steps into the jet, her heart pounded harder than it had in years. Because for the first time, she realized something unsettling. She hadn't just misjudged her co-pilot. She might have misjudged everything about the man she was about to trust with her life. The cabin door hissed shut behind Rachel as she stepped into the charter jet, the familiar scent of polished leather and aviation-grade cleaning supplies filling her senses. Normally, the space brought her comfort, a bubble where only her skills mattered. But today it felt different. Tension lingered like static electricity in the air. She could feel Daniel's presence before she even turned. He entered calmly, closing the cockpit door behind him with a soft click. The jet's interior suddenly seemed smaller somehow, charged with unspoken friction. Rachel took her seat in the left cockpit chair. She adjusted her harness meticulously, every click of the buckles punctuating her authority. Pilots relied on order, and Rachel thrived on it. She was the type who memorized every checklist, every protocol, every nuance of aircraft behavior, years of precision flying condensed into instinct. And yet, this situation, it threatened to unravel it all. Daniel took his seat in the right, eyes calm, hands resting lightly on his knees. He didn't fumble with checklists, didn't fidget with the instruments. He simply sat observing, waiting. A quiet confidence radiated from him, so calm it almost irritated her. "I own this aircraft," he said finally, breaking the silence. Rachel's hands paused mid-adjustment on the throttle. She forced a polite, professional smile. "Yes, I noticed." "I figured you notice," he said, his voice even, almost amused. "But I don't think you understand what that really means." Rachel arched an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." Daniel opened the thin black folder again. "This plane isn't just managed by Horizon. Every detail, maintenance, flight schedule, upgrades is my decision. I hire the pilots, choose the routes, approve the passengers. I'm not just sitting here as a co-pilot. I'm accountable." Rachel exhaled slowly, suppressing a flicker of embarrassment. Her mind raced. She had been dismissive, judgmental, and wrong. That tight knot in her stomach didn't come from turbulence. It came from the stark realization that she had misread him completely. A man she had stereotyped in one sweeping judgment was actually responsible, meticulous, and, dare she admit it, exceptionally competent. "Still don't want to fly with me?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet but pointed. Rachel stared at the panel, avoiding his eyes. She hated the sensation, hated feeling caught off guard, unprepared. Her career had been built on staying in control, and right now she had lost it. And yet, as she glanced at him, there was something else. A calm assurance, like someone who had carried far more weight than she could imagine, and carried it flawlessly. The engines roared to life under her hands, vibrating through the cabin and into her chest. The familiar sensation should have grounded her, but the mental tension was suffocating. She felt watched, analyzed, but in a way that wasn't invasive, calculated, precise, professional. Daniel leaned back slightly. "You don't have to pretend this doesn't matter," he said. "I know you judged me before you even spoke to me." Rachel clenched her fists on the throttle. His words hit too close to home. She had done exactly that, judged him on assumptions, on labels, on what she thought she knew about single dads and pilots with gaps in their careers. And she had been wrong. "You think I misjudged you?" she asked quietly, though her voice trembled just slightly. "I know you did," he said simply. "And that's fine, happens all the time, but I promise you, Captain, I don't take shortcuts, not with planes, not with people." The jet taxied smoothly toward the runway. Rachel's mind struggled to focus on the instruments. Normally, she thrived in moments like this, but today, each gauge, each dial seemed amplified, every flicker of the lights, every vibration of the fuselage carrying more weight than usual. Daniel's presence wasn't a distraction exactly. It was challenging, stirring emotions she hadn't anticipated. As they cleared the runway for takeoff, Rachel felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was her element: speed, height, precision, control. Yet now, with Daniel sitting beside her, owning every inch of this plane she had assumed she commanded, the rules felt rewritten. The jet lifted, slicing through the air with power and grace. Below them, the city shrank into a patchwork of roads and rooftops. Rachel's eyes flicked to Daniel, who monitored the instruments with effortless concentration. She wanted to assert dominance, to remind him who was the captain, but the truth was undeniable. He knew this plane inside and out, more than she did, and he was calm, unshakable, and aware of every variable she hadn't yet considered. A tense silence stretched across the cockpit. Each moment added weight to the air. Then subtly, she noticed the first signs of what made him different. When a minor gust buffeted the aircraft, Daniel didn't panic. He adjusted flaps, called out subtle readings, and suggested a micro-adjustment in course, all in the softest, most unobtrusive voice. Rachel felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just competence. This was mastery, the kind that came not from textbooks, but from life experience, responsibility, and sheer necessity. He had been living with stakes far higher than she could imagine, and that reflected in every calm, measured gesture. Her mind raced. He's a single dad. He flies professionally. He owns this aircraft. And I just assumed he was a liability. A pang of shame hit her, but there was no time to dwell. The jet climbed, engines humming steadily, leaving the coastline behind. Clouds stretched across the horizon, sunlight glinting off their edges. The kind of morning that pilots loved, clear visibility, but a hint of turbulence near the mountains. Daniel broke the silence again. "Captain, I need to tell you something about the fuel load before we hit the Rockies." Rachel's hands hovered over the throttle. Normally, she would have taken the lead, issuing commands, making the call. But now she paused. His expertise was evident, and he was right. She bit her lip, realizing she had a choice: assert authority and risk ignoring vital information, or listen and adapt. She chose the latter. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge she hadn't expected. He detailed adjustments to fuel mixture, course, and altitude. Each recommendation was precise, calculated, and informed by intimate knowledge of this aircraft, the one she had assumed belonged solely to her authority as the captain. Rachel felt an unfamiliar tension, admiration mixed with anxiety. The professional pride she clung to was being challenged, and she hated it. Then came the subtle sound, an unusual flicker in the cockpit panel. A warning light blinked for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible. Daniel's head snapped toward it. "Minor hydraulic fluctuation," he noted, voice calm. "Could be a sensor, could be a line. Either way, I've logged it in maintenance. No immediate risk. We'll monitor." Rachel's hands gripped the yoke tighter. She had expected him to falter, to overreact. Instead, he had anticipated, assessed, and addressed the anomaly without hesitation. Her pride wrestled with her logic. This man, this single dad, knows this plane better than anyone else in this hangar, even me. The realization hit like a thunderclap. She had judged him, dismissed him, and now she owed him respect, attention, and trust. And yet she couldn't shake the tension gnawing at her gut. She had entered the cockpit thinking this flight would be routine. Now everything felt unpredictable. Daniel glanced at her, calm as ever but with a knowing edge in his eyes. "You okay, Captain?" Rachel blinked, flustered. "Fine, let's proceed." He nodded once, returning attention to the instruments. But the moment lingered. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. She had misjudged him, and now the stakes were higher than ever. And as the aircraft climbed higher toward Denver, the clouds ahead thickening subtly, Rachel felt an unfamiliar thrill, a mixture of fear, respect, and the quietest spark of curiosity. Because she didn't know it yet, but the flight was about to test more than her skills. It was about to test her judgment, her trust, and her capacity to see beyond assumptions. And Daniel, he already knew exactly how the flight would unfold and just how much she had to learn. The storm wasn't just in the sky, it was already building between them. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the jet climbed above San Diego, the city shrinking beneath them into a patchwork of roads, marinas, and rooftops. Outside, the horizon burned gold under the rising sun, clouds stretching lazily, invitingly. But Rachel Monroe didn't feel the usual calm she associated with early morning flights. Something in the cockpit felt electric charged. She glanced at Daniel Carter. He was calm, precise, his fingers tracing subtle adjustments over the console. No hesitation, no nervous twitch, just complete command. She tried to focus on her instruments. Altitude steady, heading perfect, engine readings normal. The kind of flight she could run blindfolded. Yet her mind kept straying back to him, this man she had judged in seconds, now proving he belonged in the cockpit as much as she did, if not more. "Captain," Daniel's voice cut through the hum of engines, soft, almost conversational. "I'd like to suggest a minor adjustment in our climb rate. The turbulence predicted over the Rockies will hit sooner than the forecast indicates." Rachel's hands gripped the yoke instinctively. "Based on what?" "Experience," he said, eyes on the radar screen. "And data from this aircraft's sensors. She's lighter than normal. Combined with the crosswinds, we'll need to adjust now if we want to avoid a rough ride." Rachel paused. Normally she would assert her command, but something in his voice, calm, confident, precise, made her hesitate. She studied the radar, noting the rising red clusters of storm activity near the mountains. He was right. "Go ahead," she said, voice clipped. She didn't want to admit it, but she trusted him for now. Daniel nodded subtly, adjusting controls, his hands moving like an extension of the aircraft itself. The jet responded instantly, ascending at the new rate, climbing into smoother air. Rachel felt a surge of relief, but also a flicker of unease. How had she missed this? How had she assumed he would falter? And then it came, the first real jolt. The plane shook violently. A sudden stomach-dropping turbulence. Lights flickered. The aircraft rolled slightly, then snapped back under the stabilizers. Rachel's heart jumped, fingers white against the yoke. "Whoa," she muttered under her breath. "That wasn't forecast." Daniel's calm presence remained unshaken. He leaned forward, eyes scanning the instruments and the radar. "Fast-building storm cell, right where we're heading. We'll need to divert slightly west to avoid the worst of it." "ATC hasn't cleared us for that course change," Rachel snapped, tension rising. He turned to her, voice firm, unwavering. "Trust me. We'll request clearance en route, but we can't fight this storm straight on. The turbulence alone could damage the aircraft, and that's unacceptable." Rachel hesitated, her fingers tightening on the yoke. Every instinct screamed caution, control, but another voice, quieter, deeper, whispered, "He's right." She gave a sharp nod. "Do it." Daniel made the adjustment seamlessly. The jet banked slightly, tilting into the turn. Outside, clouds thickened, gray and menacing, slicing past the windows in rapid motion. Lightning flickered in the distance, distant but growing. Rachel's pulse raced. She had flown through storms before. She had trained for turbulence that could snap wings off aircraft in theory. But today, she felt exposed, challenged, and acutely aware of the man beside her. "You're calm," she said after a tense silence. "I thought turbulence would bother you." Daniel's eyes never left the instruments. "Turbulence is part of the job. Panic is not. People's lives depend on how we respond, not how scared we are." Rachel swallowed hard. "People's lives." "Yes," he said softly, "including ours." Her chest tightened. A shiver ran through her, not from fear but from respect, awe, and something else she couldn't quite name. Another jolt hit, this one stronger. The jet rocked violently, throwing Rachel against her harness. She gritted her teeth, clinging to the controls. "Fuel?" she asked, almost automatically. Daniel adjusted a knob, his hands calm, precise. "Ample, but the shift in altitude is putting stress on the stabilizers. We'll need to monitor closely." Rachel studied him. Every gesture was measured, every command deliberate. No hesitation. She had underestimated him. He wasn't just competent, he was meticulous, seasoned, and entirely reliable under pressure. Her pride twisted in her chest. She had refused to fly with him, judged him for his personal life, and now, he was the anchor keeping the aircraft steady in chaos. "Rachel," he said gently, almost conversationally, "take a deep breath, focus on control, not fear." She did slowly, heart pounding. She exhaled. Her grip eased slightly, her mind recalibrated. The storm ahead didn't care about her pride, her assumptions, or her reputation. But Daniel did, and that realization unsettled her more than any gust of wind. Hours, or what felt like hours compressed into minutes, passed as they navigated around the storm cell. Lightning flashed closer. Turbulence rattled the jet intermittently, but Daniel's calm guidance kept them steady. Rachel found herself watching him more than the instruments. Every adjustment, every word, every measured action conveyed not just skill but intimacy with this aircraft and with flight itself. She realized he wasn't just flying this plane. He knew it, owned it, respected it, something she had never truly done until now. And then came the subtle moment that changed everything. A minor warning light blinked faintly on the panel, a hydraulic fluctuation, barely perceptible. Rachel's fingers instinctively twitched toward the switch. Daniel caught it first. "Minor issue," he said calmly, eyes scanning the instruments. "Sensor glitch, nothing immediate. We'll log it for maintenance, but no threat to flight stability. I've got it." Rachel froze, stunned. This was what she had been missing: precision, foresight, calm in moments that would make others sweat. "Wow," she breathed almost aloud. You're incredible." He gave her a faint smile, just a flicker. "You're not bad yourself, Captain." She blinked, caught off guard. Pride, embarrassment, admiration, all twisted in her chest. For the first time, she realized she was learning from someone she had dismissed. And then came the storm's real test. Ahead, the clouds darkened, roiling and furious. The wind picked up, rattling the fuselage. The jet dipped suddenly as a violent gust slammed against the left wing. Rachel's stomach lurched, and the yoke jolted violently in her hands. Daniel's hand moved to hers, not taking control but guiding, steadying. "Trust me," he said. Her heart hammered. She nodded, letting herself follow. Her pride fought her, but survival instincts won. The storm was growing, relentless, unpredictable, and terrifying. And somewhere deep inside, Rachel realized that her trust in Daniel and in herself was about to be tested like never before. The sky wasn't just turbulent. Their entire understanding of each other, of control, and of judgment was about to face its ultimate trial. And at that moment, Rachel Monroe knew one thing with terrifying clarity. This flight would change everything. The jet leveled off above the jagged peaks of the Rockies, the storm finally easing into scattered turbulence. Sunlight pierced the clouds, casting long golden beams across snow-dusted ridges below. Rachel exhaled, her chest tight, palms still slick with sweat. She had survived the storm, not alone, but because of Daniel Carter. Every instinct she had clung to, every rule she had followed, had led to this moment of grudging respect, tinged with something far more complicated. "Good work," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the instruments. Her voice was low, almost hesitant. "You kept us steady. No panic, no mistakes." Daniel's hands rested lightly on the console, relaxed, controlled. He didn't smile. He didn't boast. He simply said, "We saved each other." Rachel blinked, startled. The words weren't just about flying, they carried an unspoken weight. For a moment, she let herself imagine the life he had been juggling. 2 kids, a grieving heart, the responsibility of a jet worth millions, all without letting the world see cracks in his armor. "You're different from what I expected," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The hum of the engines filled the silence, punctuated by faint turbulence. "I thought you'd be distracted, preoccupied. Not this." Daniel leaned back in his seat, eyes softening but still sharp. "I can't afford distraction in the cockpit. Not for passengers, not for the aircraft. But I'm always aware of what's waiting for me on the ground." His gaze flicked toward the door, almost reflexively. "I have 2 kids at home depending on me." Rachel felt a pang of empathy she hadn't anticipated. She had been quick to judge him, labeled him a liability, assumed his personal life would interfere with professional responsibility. But here, above 37,000 feet, he was the epitome of calm, precision, and reliability. And yet the vulnerability in his admission made him human, approachable, and startlingly real. "I judged you," she said, almost reluctantly, harshly, without reason. He nodded once. "Happens a lot, but pilots judge each other on instinct. You weren't wrong to be cautious. You were just unaware." Rachel studied him, and something shifted. Respect turned into curiosity. Curiosity into a strange, unexpected warmth. For the first time in a long time, she felt the pull of trust forming in a place she hadn't anticipated. Above the clouds, in the thin air of a cockpit, alongside a man she thought she knew but didn't. The jet hummed steadily, cutting through the thinning cloud cover. Below, the peaks gleamed white in the sunlight, streams of ice-fed rivers snaking through valleys. The storm's fury was behind them, yet the tension remained in the cockpit, taut and alive. Then his phone buzzed, faint but insistent. Daniel glanced at it, his expression shifting from calm focus to subtle concern. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the device. "My daughter's school, there's an emergency," he said softly, almost apologetically. Rachel's eyes widened. "Is she okay?" "I don't know," he replied, already reaching to unbuckle. "It could be minor, could be serious." Her professional instincts screamed at her, maintain focus, stay in the cockpit, but her personal instincts overrode them. She saw the tension in his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders, the worry he was trying to mask. And for the first time, Rachel's thoughts weren't on procedure or pride, they were on him. "You're handling this alone," she said quietly. "You don't have to." He looked at her surprised. A faint, incredulous expression flickered across his face. "I usually do, always have." Rachel's chest tightened. "Not anymore." The words felt heavier than either of them expected. For a moment, the jet's hum became a distant background noise. Time seemed to stretch as they shared the space, breathing the same recycled air, both aware of the storm they had just survived, and the storm that lingered unspoken between them. Daniel finally exhaled, leaning back slightly. "I never thought someone would see me like this. Not the pilot, not the dad, not the person carrying everything at once." Rachel's fingers brushed a checklist, yet her eyes stayed on him. "I did," she said softly. "I judged before understanding. That was my mistake." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, alive, full of unspoken acknowledgement. They were both aware that something profound had shifted, not just between pilot and co-pilot, but between two people who had both lived lives of isolation and responsibility, now forced into proximity by circumstance. "Denver isn't far," Daniel said finally, a note of professional calm creeping back into his voice. "We'll be landing soon." But he paused almost reluctantly. "I need to get to my daughter." Rachel felt the tension spike again. "Do you want me to handle the landing?" she asked, though her voice was careful, almost hesitant. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'll land, but thank you for everything back there." Her chest swelled with an odd mixture of pride and embarrassment. She had refused to fly with him, judged him, doubted him. And yet here they were, still airborne, still alive, and something unspoken had bonded them. Below, the Rockies stretched endlessly. Sunlight reflected off jagged cliffs, rivers, and valleys, painting the world in sharp contrasts. Above, the sky was calm, almost serene. Yet the storm of emotions between them remained unresolved, palpable. Rachel looked at Daniel, really looked at him, the way he sat, calm, experienced, responsible, yet capable of vulnerability he rarely let anyone see. She realized she didn't just respect him anymore. She felt protective, concerned, invested. The thought hit her with surprising force. "I've never felt this way about a co-pilot, or anyone really." And just as the jet began its descent toward Denver, another alert sounded, this one faint, almost negligible. But Daniel's eyes sharpened immediately. He scanned the instruments, assessed the data, and made a subtle adjustment. Rachel watched, impressed and slightly unnerved. He was always ready, always alert, always carrying more than anyone else could see. And for a brief, suspended moment, she realized she was beginning to see him, not as a single dad, not as a co-pilot, not as someone she had judged, but as someone extraordinary. The descent continued, the runway lights appearing faintly in the distance as the jet cut through the thinning clouds. Rachel felt the weight of the flight, the storm, and her own misjudgment pressing on her chest. Daniel glanced at her, eyes calm, steady, but with a flicker of something deeper, a trust, an understanding, a silent acknowledgement that what had just passed between them wasn't just turbulence in the air, it was turbulence in the heart. "Landing smooth," he said softly. "But Captain, next time maybe don't judge me before the flight." Rachel smirked, the tension easing slightly though her heart still raced. "Next time I'll try not to, but I won't promise." Daniel's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. "Fair enough." The jet touched down smoothly, wheels kissing the runway with precision, the engines roaring as they slowed to taxi speed. The storm was behind them, but the emotional storm was only beginning. As the jet taxied to its gate, Rachel realized one thing. The flight had changed her, not just as a pilot, but as a person. She had seen someone judged unfairly rise above assumptions, and in doing so, he had broken through her walls in ways she hadn't anticipated. And Daniel, He had done more than just fly a plane. He had revealed a part of himself she would never forget. But neither of them knew the next challenge was waiting on the ground, where life outside the cockpit would test their trust and their fragile connection like never before. The storm was over, but the real test was about to begin. The Denver airport lights glimmered below, flickering through the remaining mist of the receding storm. Rachel Monroe's hands still rested lightly on the yoke, though the tension in her shoulders hadn't entirely left. Her mind was caught between two realities: the technical satisfaction of completing a demanding flight and the emotional undercurrent Daniel had stirred in her, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Daniel glanced at her, fingers poised over the console. "We need to finalize the pre-landing checks. I want to make sure the aircraft is in top shape for the next leg." Rachel exhaled slowly, forcing her focus back to the procedural. "Go ahead." He began ticking off items silently: hydraulic pressure, fuel levels, flight controls. Each adjustment was minor, almost imperceptible, yet crucial. It was the kind of meticulous attention to detail Rachel admired, attention born of experience and ownership. He wasn't just performing. He was protecting the aircraft as if it were part of him, which, in a way, it was. And then came the phone call. Daniel's phone buzzed sharply again, pulling him from the cockpit checks. He glanced at it briefly, and his face changed, calm replaced by tension, a slight clench in his jaw. "Rachel," he said softly, almost apologetically, "my daughter's school, it's serious. She's not answering, and they said she might need to go to the hospital." Rachel's professional instincts battled her personal ones. The plane still needed to land, and she couldn't let panic seep into the cockpit, but her eyes softened as she saw the flicker of worry in his steady demeanor. "I can take the landing," she offered, voice quiet but firm. Daniel's eyebrows lifted, surprised. "You do that?" "I'll do it," she said, meeting his eyes. "You need to handle this. I've got the plane, trust me." He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Rachel saw the gratitude, the relief that she had stepped up, that he didn't have to bear this alone. As the jet descended, the airport grew closer, lights guiding them like beacons through the thinning fog. The engines hummed steadily, but the emotional tension between them thrummed louder than the turbines. "You don't usually let anyone handle things for you, do you?" Rachel asked, keeping her eyes on the runway. Daniel shook his head. "Not often. I've had to do everything myself for years. Kids, work, flying, I don't rely on anyone." His voice was soft, but there was a note of vulnerability beneath the surface. Rachel glanced at him. She realized something about trust, about control. For years, she had relied on protocols, checklists, and predictable behavior, but Daniel's presence had taught her something new. Sometimes, trust meant giving up control without losing your own command. The jet touched down smoothly, wheels rolling on wet tarmac. The city lights reflected off puddles, creating streaks of gold and silver beneath the aircraft. Daniel exhaled, visibly relaxing for the first time in hours. Rachel had landed them safely, and for a fleeting moment, they both allowed themselves to breathe. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. "Seriously, I don't usually have someone step up like that." Rachel smirked faintly, brushing damp hair back from her forehead. "Guess we're learning from each other, huh?" He nodded, but his eyes were distant, focused on his phone. "I need to go. I'll call the kids' hospital, make sure she's okay." Rachel hesitated, then said, "I'll come with you if you want." Daniel looked at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "You would?" "I said I'd help," she replied simply. "We're a team up here, might as well be one down there." They exited the jet quickly, the cold Denver air hitting them with a sharp bite. Daniel moved fast, checking his phone repeatedly as Rachel kept pace, her professional composure blending with genuine concern. The airport was alive with activity: baggage carts, ground crew, passengers disembarking. But Rachel felt like she existed in a bubble, focused entirely on him and the situation unfolding. Finally, Daniel stopped near a quiet corner and dialed the hospital. He spoke softly, his eyes darting to Rachel occasionally, sharing updates without words. Each word he exchanged carried weight: fear, responsibility, love. Rachel watched him, noticing how he juggled roles with precision. Pilot, father, owner, protector. Every layer of him revealed in moments like this, raw and unfiltered. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Rachel could feel the weight of unspoken emotions pressing down, the professional barriers blurring. She realized she didn't just respect him anymore, she was invested in the outcome, in the well-being of his family, in him. Finally, Daniel hung up. She's okay. Minor injury, mostly frightened. They're keeping her for observation, but she'll be fine. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave, and Rachel saw him exhale fully, shoulders sagging for the first time in hours. "You okay?" she asked gently. He looked at her, a faint, tired smile forming. "Yeah, thanks to you." Rachel nodded, the storm inside her beginning to settle. Yet she knew the flight wasn't over, not the one outside the cockpit, not the one that had been building between them since the tarmac back in San Diego. "We should get back," she said, tone professional again, though softer than before. "Next leg waits." Daniel glanced at her, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper in his eyes. "We make a good team, don't we?" Rachel allowed herself a small smile. "Better than I expected." But just as they began to walk back toward the aircraft, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Daniel's. It was Horizon Charter, calling with urgent news. The jet would need to be prepped immediately for an emergency medical transport flight, critical and non-negotiable. Daniel's jaw tightened. His kids needed him. The aircraft required attention. Lives depended on their response. Rachel watched him, seeing the conflict written plainly across his face. His responsibility to his children, his aircraft, and his passengers all collided in that tense moment. She understood now what real stakes meant. Not turbulence at 37,000 feet, but the impossible balance of life, duty, and care. "You don't have to choose alone," she said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll handle this together." Daniel looked at her, eyes wide for the first time. "You do that." "I already am," she said. Her voice was calm, firm, unwavering. And in that moment, Daniel realized something profound. For the first time since his wife died, he wasn't carrying everything by himself. Someone else, not just capable but committed, was willing to share the weight. The storm they had survived in the air was nothing compared to the storm of life waiting on the ground, yet together, they could face it. As they approached the aircraft once more, Rachel knew the flight had changed her, and Daniel. Trust had been tested, boundaries had been challenged, and a fragile connection had begun to form, one that neither of them fully understood yet. But one thing was certain: the real journey, the one that mattered, had only just begun. The Horizon Charter Lounge in Denver was quiet, almost sterile, with the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Rachel Monroe leaned against the counter, arms crossed, as she watched Daniel walk toward the briefing room. His phone buzzed continuously, but he ignored it, focused on the paperwork spread across the table. Every movement radiated control and responsibility, the same calm precision that had saved them during the storm and earned her reluctant admiration. "Captain Monroe," a voice interrupted, drawing her attention. It was Chief Pilot Reynolds, a man in his 50s whose silver hair and hawk-like gaze commanded authority. "I hear you handled a rather complicated situation today." Rachel straightened. "Yes, sir. The flight went as planned under the circumstances." Her tone was formal, professional, but underneath her mind churned. She had expected praise, perhaps, but she also knew whispers were already circulating among the staff. A female captain refusing to fly with a co-pilot, and then having to land that same co-pilot's plane under extreme conditions, was the kind of story that spread fast in aviation circles. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Your co-pilot, Daniel Carter, correct. Rachel glanced toward the briefing room where Daniel was now seated, quietly reviewing flight logs. She nodded. Yes, he performed exceptionally. I wouldn't hesitate to fly with him again. Reynolds studied her, silent for a long moment, even with distractions. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried weight. We've had reports, concerns from other staff. Rachel felt a heat rise to her face but held her ground. Especially because of them, she said. Daniel is highly skilled, focused, more than capable of handling complex situations, personally and professionally. I stand by my assessment. The room fell silent. Reynolds' gaze softened slightly. He nodded, impressed with her candor and poise. But the whispers outside were still there. Rachel could feel the weight of reputations, hers, Daniel's, and the company's, all converging in this tiny lounge. Later in the staff room, other pilots gathered discreetly, exchanging looks. Whispers floated through the air, tinged with curiosity, skepticism, and a hint of judgment. That's the woman who refused to fly with him, right? One pilot muttered. She landed his plane through a storm, another replied, voice low. And he's what a single dad, owns the jet, unreal. Rachel entered, overhearing snippets. Their eyes flicked to her, some filled with curiosity, others with thinly veiled criticism. She ignored it. She had no time for gossip. Daniel appeared beside her, subtly acknowledging the tension with a calm nod. He didn't flinch, didn't rise to the whispers. He had faced scrutiny all his life, being a single father in a demanding career, running his own aircraft operation, and he had learned how to endure. Rachel realized something. He wasn't just a co-pilot. He was a man tested by life, and the world could throw any judgment his way. It wouldn't shake him. She felt a mixture of admiration and protectiveness stir inside her, emotions she had spent years suppressing in her professional life. Later, when they were alone in the briefing room reviewing the next flight, Daniel looked up. You didn't have to defend me out there, he said quietly. Rachel arched an eyebrow. I did. I know what it's like to be underestimated, and frankly, you deserved it. He studied her, a small, almost amused smile forming. You've changed a lot since the tarmac. So have you, she replied, eyes softening. You're not just a pilot. You're responsible in ways most people don't understand. You handle more than anyone should have to. Daniel's expression shifted, a flicker of vulnerability appearing beneath his calm exterior. That's life. I've learned to manage it, and today, you helped me manage it better. Rachel felt her chest tighten. She had been judgmental, dismissive, cautious. Yet Daniel's presence, his competence, and his unspoken honesty had shifted something inside her. She realized that trust wasn't about avoiding risk. It was about recognizing skill and integrity, even when your instincts scream otherwise. But the calm didn't last. Horizon Charter's management called a sudden meeting, summoning both of them. The tension was immediate, palpable. Captain Monroe, Mr. Carter, the operations manager began, voice firm. We've reviewed today's flight and the reports from ATC. While the outcome was excellent, we have concerns about precedent, perception, and policy. Rachel's stomach tightened. She had anticipated scrutiny, but this felt heavier, more strategic. Specifically, the manager continued, your co-pilot is a single parent, owns the aircraft, and had personal emergencies during the flight. While the outcome was satisfactory, this raises questions about risk management and chain of command. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his composure never faltered. He met Rachel's gaze briefly, the silent understanding passing between them clear. This wasn't just about flying, it was about judgment, reputation, and the perception of professionalism. Rachel spoke first, calm but assertive. With all due respect, the outcome speaks for itself. Mr. Carter demonstrated exceptional skill, calm under pressure, and full control of the aircraft at all times. Any perceived distractions were handled without impacting safety. The manager's eyes flicked to Daniel. Your personal responsibilities, your children could have affected performance. That's the concern. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I understand the concern, but I assure you, my children never compromise my performance. I've flown this aircraft for years, through emergencies, weather, and operational challenges. Today's flight was no exception. Rachel felt a swell of pride and relief. His honesty, calm authority, and unwavering commitment reminded her of everything she had misjudged earlier. She had underestimated him, and that misjudgment had nearly cost her confidence, if not worse. The manager paused, weighing their words. You've both made compelling points, but understand perception matters. The industry watches and rumors can travel faster than facts. Your reputations are now intertwined. Rachel's eyes flicked to Daniel. Intertwined, she asked softly, a note of both curiosity and apprehension in her voice. Yes, the manager said, and decisions may need to be made regarding future flights, scheduling, and crew assignments. Be aware, your performance will continue to be scrutinized. As they left the meeting, Daniel exhaled softly. A tension Rachel hadn't realized was still lingering, finally easing. You're calm, she said quietly, even under scrutiny. He looked at her, faint smile forming. You learn quickly that panic never helps, and neither does fighting what's real. Rachel nodded, watching the staff move about the terminal. She knew the whispers, the glances, the subtle judgments. They weren't going away. But something had changed. Today had tested more than their piloting skills. It had tested judgment, trust, and perception. And together they had emerged stronger. For Rachel, the challenge wasn't just navigating turbulence or emergency landings. It was navigating the storm of reputation, judgment, and the subtle, unspoken connection growing between them. And as she glanced at Daniel walking beside her, she realized, in the midst of all the scrutiny, one truth remained undeniable. They were a team the world didn't yet understand. And neither of them knew how far that partnership, and what it implied, might reach. The Horizon Charter boardroom was cold and silent, the low hum of air conditioning the only background to the tension thickening the room. Rachel Monroe sat stiffly in the captain's chair, her flight bag set aside, hands clasped in her lap. Across from her, Daniel Carter remained composed, yet Rachel noticed subtle shifts, a slight tightening of his jaw, a hand brushing against the folder he always carried, the shadow of fatigue in his eyes. They had been summoned together, a rare move that spoke volumes. A group of executives, including the operations manager and chief pilot Reynolds, sat across the long table, each expression carefully neutral, their pens hovering over notes. The weight in the room was unmistakable. Captain Monroe, Mr. Carter, the operations manager began, voice clipped and precise. We've reviewed the events of your flight from San Diego to Denver, as well as the subsequent actions in Denver itself. While the flight outcome was satisfactory, your conduct has raised concerns about precedent, crew assignment policies, and most importantly, public perception. Rachel straightened, meeting the manager's gaze evenly. With all due respect, sir, the flight went smoothly. Every action taken was in accordance with safety protocols and the circumstances we faced. The manager nodded but did not concede. That may be true. However, the optics of refusing a co-pilot, then having to rely on that same co-pilot, who also owns the aircraft and had personal emergencies, creates complications for our corporate image. There's also the matter of internal morale among other pilots. Daniel's hands rested calmly on the table, but his voice carried a quiet authority. I understand the concern, but Captain Monroe's decision-making and my own ensured the safety of passengers, aircraft, and crew. Nothing else matters more in aviation. There was a pause. The executives exchanged glances, unspoken tension hanging like a storm cloud. Then the operations manager spoke, cutting through the silence. Given the unusual circumstances, we're forced to make an executive decision, he said. From this point forward, your assignments will be subject to strict oversight. Moreover, we're issuing a formal review of all co-pilot pairings, specifically addressing single parents in the cockpit. And Captain Monroe, his gaze sharpened. You are being cautioned regarding judgment calls that could be construed as bias or unprofessionalism. Do you understand? Rachel's jaw tightened. She had anticipated scrutiny but not an outright warning. The humiliation stung, even as she understood the company's perspective. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice firm. Daniel leaned forward, eyes locking with hers briefly. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of calm resolve and quiet intensity. He had faced judgment his entire life, not for incompetence, but for assumptions about his role as a father and aircraft owner. The board's ultimatum was nothing new, yet it carried a weight that could not be ignored. "And Mr. Carter," the operations manager continued, "your ownership of the aircraft complicates matters. While it's commendable that you maintain operational control, the optics of personal involvement in flights could be perceived as preferential treatment. You must strictly separate your ownership from your piloting duties, effective immediately." Daniel nodded once, voice steady. "Understood. My priority remains the safety of passengers and aircraft at all times." The room fell silent again, the tension almost suffocating. Rachel noticed the subtle glances between the executives, the unspoken evaluation of her and Daniel as a unit, a pairing that defied expectations and challenged corporate norms. She knew what they were thinking: two exceptional pilots but an unconventional combination, and far too effective under pressure. As the board concluded the meeting, Rachel and Daniel stepped into the corridor. The hum of air conditioning seemed distant now, the weight of the ultimatum pressing on both of them. "You okay?" Rachel asked quietly, voice softer than it had been in the boardroom. Daniel's gaze flicked toward the terminal windows, where the last streaks of sunset painted the tarmac in gold and shadow. "I'm fine," he replied, though his jaw remained tight. "I've faced worse, but I hope you're okay. You handled yourself well today." Rachel exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I did what had to be done. But this," she gestured toward the boardroom, "this could affect more than just our flights." Daniel's eyes met hers, and for a long moment neither spoke. There was a subtle acknowledgement between them, an unspoken understanding. The stakes had just grown beyond turbulence, storms, or even judgment in the air. They were now navigating the unpredictable skis of corporate politics, reputation, and personal scrutiny. Later, as they walked to the aircraft for the next leg of the emergency medical transport, the airport was alive with movement, ground crew bustling, passengers hustling, engines roaring in the distance. Yet the world outside felt distant. Their minds were focused inward, processing the ramifications of the ultimatum and the subtle tension between them. Daniel paused, looking at Rachel. "This isn't just about flying anymore, is it?" She shook her head. "No, it's about trust, perception, and how we navigate both under scrutiny." He smiled faintly, almost wryly. "And yet, somehow, we still have to get the plane in the air." Rachel allowed herself a small, reluctant smile. "Yes, that's the easy part." The jet gleamed under the terminal lights, engines humming with latent power. Rachel approached the cockpit, checking instruments while Daniel prepared the flight plan for the emergency transport. The partnership between them had shifted. What had begun as distrust, followed by reluctant reliance, had now evolved into a precise, mutual understanding born of necessity and respect. Yet outside, the storm of corporate oversight, whispers among peers, and the pressure of public perception lingered. Every move, every decision, every glance could be scrutinized, and both of them knew that one misstep could undo the fragile trust they had built in the cockpit. As they ascended into the night sky, the city lights shrinking below them, Rachel felt the familiar adrenaline of flight. But this time, it was tinged with something new. The thrill of piloting was no longer her sole focus. The stakes were higher, far beyond the technical challenges. She had to navigate judgment, scrutiny, and the fragile connection forming between her and Daniel, all while keeping passengers safe and the aircraft in perfect command. Daniel, seated beside her, made subtle adjustments to the instruments, eyes sharp, mind calm. Rachel watched him work and felt an uneasy mixture of admiration and something else, an emotion she had fought to suppress, but one that now demanded recognition. Neither spoke of it, yet both felt it. The ultimatum had made the stakes clear, but it had also drawn them closer in ways neither expected. Trust, reliance, and perhaps something deeper were being forged in the cockpit and tempered under pressure. As the city lights disappeared beneath the clouds and the aircraft climbed into the star-speckled sky, Rachel knew one truth with clarity that cut through the tension. The flight was far from over, not just in altitude or distance, but in life, judgment, and the bond forming between them. And above all, both of them understood the unspoken reality. The next challenge, external scrutiny, corporate politics, and personal stakes, would test not just their skills as pilots, but their ability to trust each other completely under the highest pressure imaginable. The night stretched ahead, filled with uncertainty, tension, and uncharted possibilities. And somewhere deep inside, Rachel felt it, a flicker of exhilaration, fear, and undeniable curiosity about where this partnership could lead. Because one thing was certain. After today, nothing would ever be the same. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, the moon casting pale light across the fuselage of the jet. Rachel Monroe gripped the yoke, eyes scanning instruments, horizon, and distant storm cells. Each decision, each micro-adjustment, felt heavier than ever before. The ultimatum from Horizon Charter lingered in her mind like a shadow, whispering that one misstep could end her career, Daniel's, or both. Yet beside her, Daniel Carter radiated calm authority, the same quiet strength that had guided them through storms, turbulence, and life-altering emergencies before. Tonight's flight was an emergency medical transport. A young child in need of urgent care, passengers unaware of the tension in the cockpit, relying entirely on their precision and judgment. But the real test wasn't just the storm above or the altitude. They were flying through the turbulence of scrutiny, expectation, and unspoken connection. Daniel broke the silence, voice soft, almost casual. "Denver's airport control has cleared us for approach. Wind sheer near the mountains, slight, but enough to keep our hands busy." Rachel nodded, heart pounding. Her professional focus sharpened, but her chest tightened as she glanced at him. His presence was comforting, grounding, but also a subtle reminder of everything she had misjudged and had now come to respect. "Ready for this?" she asked quietly, tone low enough that only he could hear. He offered a faint, reassuring smile. "Always with you, absolutely." The jet descended, slicing through clouds that glowed under the airport lights below. The instruments hummed steadily, the engines a low, powerful vibration beneath them. Rachel adjusted flaps, monitored altitude, and aligned the aircraft with the glide path. Every movement precise, every calculation deliberate. Yet beneath her professional exterior, emotions roiled, a cocktail of tension, admiration, and something she refused to name aloud. Suddenly, a subtle flicker on the panel caught her eye. A minor hydraulic warning, barely noticeable but real. Daniel's hand moved instinctively over the console, adjusting, compensating, smoothing out the anomaly without a word. Rachel felt a flicker of awe. In years of flying, she had rarely seen such calm under pressure. His competence wasn't just skill. It was intimate knowledge born of ownership, experience, and relentless responsibility. "Storm cells clearing ahead," Daniel said, voice steady, confident. "Landing should be smooth if we follow the approach." Rachel exhaled slowly, though her heart still raced. The flight was nearing its final descent, and yet the real turbulence, between trust, judgment, and personal connection, remained unresolved. She realized how deeply she had misjudged him at first, how wrong assumptions had clouded her perception. And now, faced with the imminent landing, she understood. She didn't just trust him as a co-pilot, She relied on him completely, emotionally and professionally. As the runway lights grew brighter, cutting through the night, Daniel spoke again, softer this time. "Rachel, I want you to know something. I've flown through storms before, emergencies, personal crises. But today I realized, having you here, trusting you, relying on you, it made all the difference. More than any protocol or experience." Rachel's breath caught. The words weren't just about flight. They were about connection, acknowledgement, and a shared understanding forged under pressure. She glanced at him, catching the subtle intensity in his eyes, the rare vulnerability that most never saw. Before she could respond, turbulence rippled through the jet, minor but sudden. Rachel adjusted instinctively, Daniel guiding silently, his hand brushing hers as he corrected a microshift in altitude. The contact was fleeting, yet electricity shot through her, awareness sharpened, heart pounding. "Almost there," he said quietly. "Stay focused, we've got this." The runway lights grew nearer, the glide path perfectly aligned. Rachel felt the aircraft respond to every input with precision. She adjusted the throttle, flaps, and rudder, executing the final approach flawlessly. Daniel's eyes never left the instruments, but she caught the subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of trust and teamwork. Then came the final jolt, gusts of crosswind hitting the aircraft as it lined up with the runway. Rachel's hands moved instinctively, yoke responding, throttle adjusted. Daniel's voice cut in softly, providing subtle corrections. They were synchronized, a team honed by hours of flying, trials of trust, and the storms they had survived together. The wheels kissed the runway and Rachel exhaled deeply, the vibration through the fuselage a grounding reminder of reality. She maintained control as the jet decelerated, engines roaring against the drag. Daniel's hand brushed hers again, this time as a gesture of quiet congratulations, acknowledgement, and something unspoken. Once stopped, engines powered down, the silence in the cockpit felt heavy and intimate. Rachel allowed herself to finally breathe, the adrenaline fading, leaving space for reflection. Daniel looked at her, eyes steady but soft. "You did exceptionally, Rachel. Every move precise, professional. You earned my respect today and my trust." Her chest tightened, a mix of relief, pride, and something deeper stirring. "I underestimated you," she admitted, voice low. "Completely. And she stopped, searching for words that balanced professionalism with the raw honesty she felt. "I'm grateful for your patience, your skill, and for trusting me." Daniel's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "We make a good team, and not just because of skill, because we trust each other, completely." Rachel felt a flicker of warmth, a spark of something fragile yet undeniable. She realized in that moment that this flight, the storm, and everything that had come before had changed her, not just as a pilot, but as a person. They unbuckled, stepping out of the cockpit into the cool Denver night. The terminal lights reflected off the jet, painting shadows that flickered like echoes of the turbulence they had survived. Staff whispered, some noticing the pair exiting together, their professionalism undeniable, their bond evident to those perceptive enough to see it. Daniel checked his phone once more, a faint tension returning. "I need to check on my daughter. She's stable, but I want to be there." Rachel nodded, feeling an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "Go," she said quietly. "I'll handle the debrief and paperwork." He paused, looking at her. "Rachel, thank you for everything, for trusting me, for today." She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and acknowledgement. "Always," she said. As Daniel walked away, Rachel stood for a moment watching him go. The flight had tested more than skills or courage. It had tested judgment, trust, and hearts. And through it all, something extraordinary had emerged. A partnership forged in turbulence, strengthened by respect and tempered by shared experience. Rachel finally exhaled, feeling the weight of the storm lift, both literal and emotional. She knew their journey wasn't over, not professionally, not personally, but the first chapter had ended in triumph. Above all, she realized this truth with crystal clarity. In the skis and in life, trust and courage were inseparable, and sometimes the most unexpected co-pilot could change everything. The Denver night stretched on, calm, serene, and full of possibilities. And somewhere inside, Rachel felt the spark of anticipation, because she knew that whatever storms awaited, she wouldn't face them alone. The flight was over, but the story, their story, had only just begun.